The rain in Maryland doesn't just fall, it mourns. Dr. Arthur Elliot sat by the window of his cramped study, watching the droplets race down the glass like tears on an old man's face. He was 72 now. His hands, the same hands that once decoded the telemetry of the stars, shook just a little as he reached for his lukewarm coffee. Clink, the spoon hit the ceramic. A sharp, lonely sound in a house that had been too quiet since Martha passed away. Just a retired data analyst, he whispered to the empty room. That's what his pension file said. That's what the neighbors at the grocery store thought when they saw him struggling with a heavy bag of oranges. But Elliot knew better. He knew that retirement was just a polite word NASA used when you had seen too much, when your eyes had captured things that weren't meant for human comprehension. He stood up, his knees popping like dry twigs. He walked toward the basement door. He hadn't opened it in years. The air down there smelled of wet concrete, cedar wood, and the suffocating weight of secrets. In the far corner, under a tarp thick with gray dust, sat a heavy, industrial-grade storage bin. It was sealed with lead tape, the kind they used in the late 80s to protect sensitive magnetic drives from interference. He remembered the night he'd smuggled it out, the sweat stinging his eyes. The way his heart had thundered against his ribs when the security guard at the gate paused to look at his trunk. He told himself he took it to protect the truth. But tonight, looking at the box, he felt a cold shiver of dread. Maybe some things stay buried for a reason, Arthur, he muttered. He pulled the tape. It gave way with a long, screeching protest. Inside, nestled in anti-static foam, were 3 matte black hard drives. They were heavy, solid. Unlike the flimsy plastic tech of today, these felt like they held the weight of a sin. He carried the oldest drive to his desk. His heart was doing that frantic, uneven dance again. Thump, thump, thump. He connected the drive to an air-gapped, modified 1990s workstation he'd kept for this exact moment. He couldn't risk the internet. If he connected this to a modern network, they would know. The algorithm would flag the file headers before he could even blink. The cooling fan whirred to life, a high-pitched scream of ancient machinery. Enter password. Elliot's fingers hovered over the keys. His mind raced back to 1989, the smoke-filled rooms, the hushed whispers in the hallways of Building 4. The day director Vance had looked him in the eye and said, "Arthur, for the sake of your family, forget you ever ran the enhancement on the far side data. It was a glitch. Just a lens flare, but a lens flare doesn't have right angles. A lens flare doesn't cast a shadow a mile long." He typed the code SELENE19. The drive hummed. A series of folders appeared. No names, just dates. December 14, 1974. Elliot froze. The official record said Apollo 17 was the last moon mission. It ended in 1972. So why was there high-res telemetry from 1974? He clicked. The first image began to render, line by line, slowly, agonizingly. It was like watching a ghost materialize out of the dark. It was a shot of the Mare Moscovians region, the dark side of the moon. The side we never see. At first it looked like the usual lunar wasteland, craters, dust, gray desolation. But then the enhancement finished. Elliot's breath hitched in his throat. He leaned so close to the monitor his nose almost touched the glass. My God, there, sitting in the middle of a massive, ancient crater was a structure. It wasn't a mountain. It wasn't a rock formation. It was a series of obsidian black pillars, perfectly hexagonal, rising out of the dust like the ribs of a dead giant. They were arranged in a perfect circle, nearly 3 miles in diameter, and in the center of the circle, a spire, sharp, aggressive, tilted at an angle that suggested it hadn't fallen, it had crashed. This wasn't nature. Nature doesn't build in geometry this precise. This was architecture. He opened the next file. The photo was taken from a lower altitude. Someone had been orbiting just a few thousand feet above the surface. In the corner of the frame, he could see the edge of a lunar module, but it wasn't the white and gold foil of the Apollo ships. This was matte black, designed for stealth. The camera had zoomed in on the spire. Around the base of the structure there were tracks, small, rhythmic indentations in the lunar soil. Footprints, Elliot whispered. His voice broke, but they weren't human. They were too wide, too deep, and they led directly into a dark, yawning opening at the base of the spire. He felt a sudden, sharp pang in his chest. This was why they'd retired him, not because he was old, not because he was slow, but because he had spent 3 nights in the lab, obsessively cleaning the noise from these images until the truth became undeniable. He remembered the morning after he'd found them. He had walked into his office to find 3 men in suits sitting at his desk. No badges, no names, just the agency. They didn't threaten him with a gun, they threatened him with a disappearance. A quiet exit, you're tired, Arthur, they had said. The stress of the job is making you see things, take the pension, go home, stay quiet. And he had, for 40 years, he had been a coward. He had lived his life, raised a daughter, buried a wife, all while carrying the knowledge that we are not alone. That the moon isn't just a satellite, it's a graveyard, or a lighthouse. He clicked on a third file. This one was a video clip, only 6 seconds long. The footage was grainy, jumping with static. It showed a lunar rover, but not the one from the history books. This one was smaller, faster. The camera was mounted on the helmet of a nameless astronaut. The astronaut was running. You could hear the heavy, panicked breathing in the comms. Ha, ha, ha. Houston, it's moving, the voice screamed. It was a young man's voice distorted by terror. The shadows, they aren't moving with the sun, it's the feed cut to white noise. Elliot pushed back from the desk, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He was sweating now, despite the chill in the basement. The images weren't just forbidden, they were a warning. He looked at the black box. There were 2 more drives, thousands of images. He realized then that he couldn't just sit here and look at them. He was an old man with a failing heart. If he died tonight, these drives would end up in a landfill, or worse, back in the hands of the people who hid them. I can't keep this anymore, he said, his voice gaining a sudden, sharp edge. He reached for his old burner phone. He knew one person, a journalist he hadn't spoken to in a decade. A man who specialized in the impossible. But as he picked up the phone, the lights in the basement flickered. BZZZT. The hum of the hard drive changed pitch. It became a low, pulsing throb. Elliot froze. Outside, the sound of the rain was suddenly drowned out by the heavy, rhythmic crunch of gravel. A car was pulling into his driveway, a car that didn't have its headlights on. Tension coiled in his gut like a snake. They were here. After 40 years, the shadows had finally caught up to him. He looked at the monitor one last time. The image of the black spire seemed to stare back at him, a dark eye watching from the vacuum of space. It's time, he whispered. The engine died outside, but the silence that followed was louder than any noise. Arthur Elliot stood frozen in the dim glow of his computer screen. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. Thump, 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 thump. He didn't turn on the lights, he couldn't. In the darkness, he was just an old man. In the light, he was a target. He crept toward the small, rectangular window at the top of the basement wall. It was at ground level, covered in years of grime and dead spiderwebs. He pressed his cheek against the cold concrete and peered out. A black SUV sat idling at the edge of his lawn. No plates. The windows were tinted so deep they looked like voids. 2 figures stepped out. They didn't hurry. They didn't look like burglars. They moved with the terrifying, clinical confidence of men who had the entire weight of the government behind them. 40 years, Elliot hissed, his breath fogging the glass. You waited 40 years for me to trip the wire. He realized then that the drive wasn't just ancient storage, it was a bait. The moment he had decrypted the SELENE19 file, a silent ping must have gone out to a server in some windowless room in Virginia. He had sat there mesmerized by the moon's secrets while the predators were already on the highway. He scrambled back to the desk. He had to move. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He didn't have time to download everything. He needed to bridge the gap. He looked at the hard drive, then at his old, clunky satellite phone, a relic he'd kept for a moment he hoped would never come. Bang, the first kick at his front door upstairs. The house shuddered. Dust drifted down from the basement rafters. Think, Arthur, think. He grabbed a high-capacity thumb drive from his drawer. It was a modern one, hidden inside the casing of an old 1980s cassette tape. He initiated a ghost mirror, a trick he'd learned back when NASA shared secrets with the CIA. It was a fast, dirty way to rip the most important files. Copying, 12%, 24%. The progress bar felt like it was moving through molasses. Bang, another kick, the wood groaned. The door would hold for maybe 30 seconds more. Elliot stared at the screen. The folder he was copying was labeled Emricon, the Cathedral. The Cathedral, that's what they called it. The spire he had seen in the photos wasn't just a crash site. As the files flickered during the transfer, he saw glimpses of the interior. Inside the spire there was light, not electricity, not fire. A soft, pulsing blue luminescence that seemed to bleed from the very walls. There were pillars made of translucent material, something that looked like ice but didn't melt. And there, in the center of a vast hall, was a map. It wasn't a map of the moon, it was a map of Earth. But Earth looked different. The continents were shifted, the oceans were higher. It was Earth from 100,000 years ago, 48%, 55%. Come on, you piece of junk, Elliot whispered, his voice cracking. Upstairs, the front door finally gave way with a sickening crack of splintering oak. Heavy boots hit the hardwood. They weren't shouting. They didn't need to. They knew he was here. They knew he had no place to run. 70%, 82%. Elliot grabbed his heavy winter coat and shoved the satellite phone into his pocket. He looked at the third hard drive, the one he hadn't opened yet. He couldn't take it. It was too heavy. He took a heavy mallet from his workbench and, with a grimace of physical pain, smashed the drive. Crunch, plastic and magnetic platters shattered. If he couldn't have the truth, neither could they. 95%, 99%, complete. He ripped the thumb drive out just as he heard the basement door upstairs being kicked open. Doctor. Elliot, a voice called out. It was polite, smooth, like a salesman selling you a coffin. Arthur, we just want to talk about the archive. You know you can't keep it. Elliot didn't answer. He dove under the crawl space behind his furnace. It was a narrow, filth-ridden tunnel that led to the old coal chute. He hadn't been through it since he was 50. He squeezed his body into the darkness. The cobwebs filled his mouth. The smell of oil and old earth was suffocating. Behind him, he heard the basement lights click on. He smashed the drive, a second voice said. This one was younger, sharper. Check the workstation. He was running a transfer. Elliot scrambled through the coal chute, his fingernails tearing as he clawed at the frozen dirt. He emerged outside into the stinging rain, tucked behind a row of overgrown hemlock trees. He didn't look back. He ran toward the woods behind his house, his lungs screaming, his heart skipping beats. He stopped a mile away, deep in the shadows of the pine trees, gasping for air. His chest felt like it was being crushed by an invisible vice. He slumped against a tree, pulling out the satellite phone. He looked back at his house. It was swarming with flashlights. They looked like fireflies dancing over a grave. He looked at the thumb drive in his hand. Inside this little piece of metal and plastic was the proof that humanity was a tenant on a planet owned by someone else. The forbidden photos weren't just about space exploration. They were about the fact that our history, everything we were taught in school, every religious text, every scientific law was a lie constructed by NASA and the agencies to keep the world from panicking. The moon wasn't a barren rock, it was a monitoring station. And someone or something had been watching us from the cathedral since before the first human learned to make fire. He turned on the satellite phone. The screen flickered to life. This is Arthur Elliot, he whispered into the receiver, his voice shaking but certain. I have the Apollo 19 files. The cathedral is real, and God help us, it's still active. He hit send on the first encrypted packet. The war for the truth had just begun. And Arthur Elliot, the tired old man who just wanted a quiet retirement, was the only one holding the line.
History is a fragile thing. It's written by winners, edited by committees, and swallowed by the public like a bitter pill coated in sugar. Arthur Elliot sat in the darkness of the Maryland woods, the cold rain soaking through his wool coat. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. Behind him, his house was being picked apart by men in suits. But his eyes were locked on the glowing screen of his satellite device. He had just bypassed the second layer of encryption on the drive labeled Project White Wing. On the surface, the world believes the moon missions ended with Apollo 17. Gene Cernan left a footprint, said some poetic words, and that was it. The lights went out. The budget was cut. But as Elliot's trembling fingers scrolled through the hidden files, the truth felt like a physical weight on his chest. NASA didn't stop because they were broke. They stopped because they were terrified. Apollo 19, Elliot whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. The official records say it was canceled, but the documents in front of him, dated March 1974, told a story of a ghost launch, a midnight ascent from a pad that didn't exist on any public map. No TV cameras, no press conferences. Just two men, Commander Jack Miller and lunar module pilot Ben Lawson. Two men who were erased from history before they even left the atmosphere. Elliot opened a folder of high-resolution scans. The first image was a shot of the lunar horizon, but it was different from any NASA photo he had ever seen. The sky wasn't just black. It was shimmering with a strange, oily distortion. The text on the side read, Target Site, Mare Moscoviense, Dark Side. He clicked on the audio logs. The static was heavy, a rhythmic thrum 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 that sounded like a heartbeat. Then a voice broke through. It was Miller. He sounded calm, but it was that hollow, brittle calm of a man who knows he is looking at his own grave. Miller. Houston, we are clearing the crater rim. The sun is behind us now. We're in the shadow. Mission Control, copy 19. Check your oxygen levels. You're breathing a bit fast, Jack. Miller, a dry, breathless laugh. You'd breathe fast too, Vance. Ben, are you seeing this? Tell me I'm not hallucinating. Lawson, I see it. It's not a rock formation. The geometry is too perfect. Houston, we have visual on the structure. It looks like a cathedral made of obsidian. It's catching the light from our thrusters. It's beautiful. And it's huge. It's miles high. Mission Control. Stay on mission, Apollo 19. Do not, I repeat, do not approach the base until you've deployed the sensors. Miller. Sensors? Houston, the sensors are going haywire. The needle is spinning like a top. There's a magnetic field here that shouldn't exist. It feels like the ground is vibrating. Elliot scrolled to the next photo. It was a close-up of the structure. It wasn't built like a human building. There were no windows, no doors, just massive black hexagonal pillars that seemed to spiral upward into the vacuum of space. And at the base, half buried in the gray lunar dust, was something that made Elliot's blood turn to ice. It was a ship, but it wasn't a NASA ship. It was shaped like a jagged shard of glass, nearly a kilometer long. It had no engines, no visible cockpit. It looked like it had been there for 1,000,000 years. Or maybe it had just grown there, like a crystal. They found a graveyard, Elliot muttered to himself. A goddamn graveyard of giants. The next series of photos were from the EVA, the moonwalk. In one image, Lawson is standing next to the alien craft. His white spacesuit is a tiny, pathetic speck against the towering black hull. He has his hand reached out, inches away from the surface of the ship. The next photo, taken seconds later, shows Lawson's glove touching the material. The black surface of the alien ship is glowing. A soft neon blue light is bleeding into his suit, creeping up his arm like a glowing vine. Lawson, screaming, "Ah, God, it's cold! Houston, it's inside my suit! It's talking!" Mission Control. Ben, pull back. Jack, get him out of there. My boots are fused to the ground. The dust is moving. It's crawling over us. Lawson, voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. It's not dust, Jack. It's them. They're awake. They've been waiting for a key. And we just turned the lock. The static on the recording became a deafening roar. Elliot flinched, pulling the headphones away from his ears. He looked at the next photo. It was a shot of the lunar horizon, taken from the rover's camera. The great black spire in the distance was no longer dark. It was pulsing with that same sickly blue light. And from the top of the spire, a beam of energy, thin as a needle, but bright as a star, was shooting straight toward Earth. Elliot's hands were shaking so hard, he almost dropped the device. He realized then that the forbidden photos weren't just about discovery. They were a crime report. NASA didn't go to the moon to explore for all mankind. They went there because the military had detected a signal. They sent Miller and Lawson as sacrificial lambs to see if the cathedral was still active. And they found out. Oh, they found out. He scrolled further, his eyes stinging from the glare of the screen. He found a medical report for subject Miller J, dated 2 weeks after the mission was supposedly lost. The report was brief. It said, "Subject shows no signs of human neural activity. The eyes have turned a solid, reflective silver. It speaks in a language that causes nausea in the nursing staff. Recommend immediate incineration." "They didn't die in space," Elliot whispered, tears pricking his eyes. "They brought them back. They brought something back inside their bodies." He looked at the last photo of this subfolder. It was a picture of the Earth, taken from the Apollo 19 capsule on its way back. But the Earth didn't look blue and white. It was covered in a web of faint glowing lines, the same blue energy from the moon. The moon wasn't a satellite. It was a parasitic tether. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the woods, a dry branch breaking. Elliot froze. He turned off the screen, plunging himself into total darkness. He held his breath, the sound of his own heart thudding in his ears like a hammer. Crunch, crunch. Someone was walking through the undergrowth, slowly, methodically. Elliot realized he had been sitting in one place for too long. The signal from the satellite link, they must have tracked it. He gripped the thumb drive in his pocket. He had 1,500 words of data left to decode for this chapter, but he was running out of time. "I'm coming, Jack," he breathed into the dark, thinking of the man who was burned alive in a secret lab 40 years ago. "I'm going to show them what they did to you." He stood up, his joints aching, and began to move deeper into the forest, toward the old abandoned ranger station. He had to finish the leak. He had to tell the world about the cathedral and the blue fire that was now hidden in every electrical wire on Earth. The shadows between the trees seemed to stretch and twist, mimicking the jagged shapes Arthur had just seen in those forbidden photos. He moved with a heavy, desperate clumsiness, his boots sinking into the mud. He wasn't just running from men in suits anymore. He was running from the realization that his entire life's work had been a shroud for something monstrous. He reached the old ranger station, a decaying wooden shack that smelled of rot and forgotten years. He slipped inside, his breath coming in ragged stutters. He didn't dare use a flashlight. Instead, he relied on the dim, ghostly glow of his satellite device to finish the final decryption of the Apollo 19 logs. "Just a little more," he pleaded with the machine. "Just give me the rest of it." The screen flickered, and the last folder opened. It was titled Project Black Box, Final Recovery. Inside was a series of photos taken by a rescue craft that had intercepted the Apollo 19 command module in high Earth orbit. The heat shield was pitted with strange, glowing craters, and the windows were frosted over from the inside with something that looked like silver veins. Elliot clicked on the final audio file. This wasn't a transmission to Houston. This was a private recording made by Ben Lawson, inside the capsule, minutes before they hit the atmosphere. Audio log start. Lawson, his voice is wet, gargling as if he's drowning in his own lungs. If anyone finds this, don't go back. Houston knows. Vance knows. They knew what was in the cathedral. Sound of heavy metallic scratching against the cabin walls. Lawson. Jack isn't. He's not Jack anymore. He hasn't breathed in 3 hours, but he's still standing there. He's staring at the earth. He keeps saying the same thing over and over. "The harvest is ready." Miller's voice, in the background, sounding like a choir of distorted frequencies. "The signal must be broadcast. The host is prepared." Lawson. "I tried to kill him. I took the emergency wrench and I hit him." His head opened, but there was no blood. Just that blue light. That goddamn blue light poured out like liquid fire. It's eating the instrument panel. It's taking control of the ship. Audio log end. Elliot's stomach churned. He looked at a photo of the recovery team, men in heavy lead-lined hazmat suits, opening the hatch of the capsule after it splashed down in a secret location in the Pacific. The photo was blurry, but you could see what they found. The interior of the capsule was covered in a biological web. It looked like human nervous systems had been pulled out and stretched across the walls to create a living circuit board. And in the center of the web sat the 2 astronauts. Their bodies were fused together, their skin turned to a translucent gray. But the most terrifying part? They were smiling. "They weren't corpses," Elliot whispered, a tear finally breaking free and rolling down his wrinkled cheek. They were antennas. He found a final memo from NASA's secret X division. It explained that the Apollo 19 mission had successfully inoculated the Earth's atmosphere with a microscopic, silicon-based intelligence. Every radio wave, every television broadcast, every phone call made since 1974 had been passing through a filter controlled by the Cathedral on the moon. We weren't just being watched. We were being programmed. Creak. The floorboard of the ranger station groaned. Arthur's heart stopped. He looked up. Standing in the doorway was a figure. A man in a dark overcoat, his face obscured by the shadows. But as the man stepped forward, the moonlight caught his eyes. They weren't human eyes. They were silver, perfectly reflective. "Dr. Elliot," the man said. The voice didn't come from his throat. It felt like it was vibrating directly inside Arthur's skull. "The archive belongs to the source. You are an old man holding a candle against a hurricane. Give us the drive. Arthur looked at the thumb drive. He looked at the screen where Ben Lawson's terrified face was frozen in a final, grainy frame. You killed them, Arthur said, his voice surprisingly steady. You turned them into hardware. We gave them purpose, the figure replied, moving closer. The same purpose we will give to everyone. The signal is almost complete. Your leak? It's just another frequency for us to use. Arthur realized then that he couldn't just upload the photos. If he sent them through the internet, he was just giving the signal more power. He needed a different way. A human way. He gripped the mallet he had brought from his basement. Then, you'll have to take it from my cold, dead hands, Arthur growled. The figure lunged. Arthur didn't run. He swung the mallet with every ounce of strength his 72-year-old body possessed. It hit the man's shoulder, and instead of a bone-breaking thud, there was a sound like a glass vase shattering. Blue light spilled out, illuminating the shack in a sickening neon glow. The figure didn't scream. It just tilted its head, the silver eyes pulsing. Arthur scrambled out of the back window, falling into the mud. He didn't look back. He ran toward the highway. He knew he couldn't go to the police. He couldn't go to the media. Everything was in the wires. He had to find the journalist. He had to give him the physical drive. As he reached the road, he saw the headlights of a car, a beat-up old truck. He waved his arms frantically. The truck slowed down. Help, please, Arthur cried out. The driver, a young man with a tired face, looked at him with confusion. Old man, what the hell happened to you? You're covered in blood? Or is that glowing? Arthur climbed into the passenger seat, clutching the drive to his chest like a holy relic. Drive, he gasped. Just drive. Don't turn on the radio. Whatever you do, don't turn on the radio. As the truck sped away, Arthur looked out the back window. The ranger station was now a beacon of blue light in the forest, and above it, the moon was rising, full, cold, and triumphant. The Apollo 19 mission hadn't failed. It had been a total success, and the world was about to find out exactly what kind of gods we had invited into our homes. Arthur Elliot sat in the passenger seat of the beat-up truck, his head resting against the cold window. The young driver was silent, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked road. Arthur's hands were still shaking, but the trembling was different now. It wasn't just fear. It was a cold, hollow realization. He reached into his pocket and touched the second drive, the one labeled Titan II, the Architects. If the moon was a parasitic transmitter, then what he was about to see next was the factory. Hey, old man, the driver said, his voice breaking the heavy silence. You okay? You're staring at that little plastic thing like it's a bomb. In a way, son, Arthur whispered, his voice dry and raspy. It is. It's a bomb that's going to blow up the sky. Arthur closed his eyes, and his mind drifted back to 1981. He remembered the buzzing excitement in the halls of NASA when the Voyager probes were sending back the first high-resolution images of Saturn. The world saw the beautiful golden rings, ice and rock dancing in perfect harmony. But in the dark rooms, the rooms where the public was never invited, the scientists weren't cheering. They were whispering in hushed, terrified tones. He opened the files on his satellite device one more time, shielding the light from the driver. The first image from the Titan II archive flickered to life. It was a raw, unedited shot from Voyager 1, taken as it approached the B ring of Saturn. But the image had been put through a massive contrast filter. Look at the gaps, Arthur muttered to himself. In the official photos, the gaps between the rings were empty space, but in this photo, they were crowded. There, nestled among the ice and dust, were shapes. They were cylindrical, metallic, and impossibly large. One of them was estimated to be over 20,000 miles long. To put that in perspective, you could fit 2 Earths inside one of these things. The scientists at NASA had dubbed them the Ringmakers, but in the secret memos they had a more formal, more ominous name, the Architects. Arthur scrolled to a series of infrared shots. These were the ones that had caused Dr. Norman Berggren, the only man who almost leaked this before, to be silenced. The photos showed the Architects in action. They weren't just sitting there. They were emitting massive plumes of electromagnetic energy. They were manufacturing the rings. The rings aren't natural, Arthur whispered, his breath hitching. A solar system-sized broadcasting array. He opened a transcript from a secret 1982 briefing between NASA's top brass and the Department of Defense. Dr. Sterling, voice filled with a strange, nervous energy. We've tracked 3 more of the vehicles entering the A-ring. They don't use thrusters. They seem to manipulate the magnetic field of the planet itself to move. General Hudson, and the rings? What's the status of the density? Dr. Sterling, it's increasing. They are thickening the ice, but it's not just ice, General. We've run the spectral analysis. There's a lattice of carbon nanostructures being woven into the particles. They are building a lens the size of a planet. General Hudson, a lens for what? Dr. Sterling, the one coming from the moon. Saturn is the amplifier. The moon is the receiver. Earth is the target. Arthur felt a wave of nausea hit him. He looked out at the dark trees passing by. He thought about how every child looks up at Saturn and sees a marvel of nature. No one tells them they are looking at a giant cosmic machine that has been refining its signal for eons. He clicked on a photo that was marked Top Secret, Mission Titan II, Classified Human Flight. His heart stopped. The date was 1985. There were no records of humans going to Saturn in the 80s. The technology shouldn't have existed. But there it was, a photo taken from a cockpit window. In the foreground, the edge of a ship, black, jagged, and unmistakably alien-looking, yet with a small NASA insignia painted on the hull. And in the background, one of the architects. Up close, the machine was terrifying. Its surface wasn't smooth metal. It looked like a city made of thousands of shifting plates. It was alive, or at least it was a machine that mimicked life. And then Arthur found the reflection photo. It was a shot of a human astronaut, his name tag blacked out, floating inside a chamber that looked like it was made of liquid glass. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was surrounded by a glowing blue vapor, the same blue energy from the Apollo 19 mission. The astronaut's skin was turning transparent. You could see his bones, but they weren't white. They were turning into silver wires. Pilot, the voice is hauntingly calm, almost melodic. We are inside the B ring. The architect, it's not a ship. It's a womb. It's where the new world is being born. Houston, I don't feel my body anymore. I feel the rings. I feel the rotation of the planet. I can hear the stars. Are you in control of the vessel? Control is such a small word. I am part of the sequence now. The architects are pleased. The signal from the moon is finally reaching full strength. The harvest we started in 1974. It's almost time to bring it home. Arthur closed the file, his hand trembling so much he dropped the device on the floor of the truck. Hey, easy there, the driver shouted, swerving slightly. I'm sorry, Arthur gasped, clutching his chest. I just saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Again. He realized then that the architects weren't just building rings, they were building a cage, a frequency cage that surrounded the entire inner solar system. And humanity? We weren't the observers, we were the experiments. NASA didn't keep the Saturn photos secret because of aliens. They kept them secret because they were working for them. The Project Titan II wasn't an exploration mission. It was a delivery service. We were delivering our own DNA to be rewritten by the machines in the rings. Arthur looked up at the roof of the truck, as if he could see through the metal, through the clouds, all the way to that golden planet. The architects, he whispered. They aren't from another galaxy. They've been here since the solar system was a cloud of dust. We are just the latest crop. The truck hit a pothole, and Arthur felt a sharp pain in his side. He was tired. So tired. But he knew he couldn't stop. He had the photos of the architects entering Earth's orbit. He had the photos of what happens when the signal from Saturn finally hits the transmitters on the moon. He looked at the young driver. Son, do you believe in God? The driver laughed nervously. Why? Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I just found out that God is a machine, and he's busy repairing his rings. The truck continued to drone down the highway, but to Arthur the world felt like it was made of cardboard. Fake. A stage set designed to keep us looking down while the real masters worked above. He picked up the device from the floor mat, his fingers brushing against the cold plastic. He needed to find the L5 folder. It was the one he had only caught a glimpse of before his basement was breached. Click. The screen bloomed with a deep, violet light. This wasn't a photo of the rings. It was a photo from inside one of the architects. The image was terrifyingly organic. It looked like the interior of a giant cathedral made of pulsating glass and fiber optic nerves. Thousands of human-sized pods were lined up along the inner hull. But these weren't for the astronauts. Arthur zoomed in. Inside the pods were seeds. That's the only way he could describe them. They were glowing, translucent spheres filled with a thick, silver fluid. In the center of each sphere, a human fetus was forming, but it was wrong. The skull was elongated, and the spine was fused with metallic threads that shimmered like the rings themselves. Transcript start, Dr. Sterling's private log. We were wrong about the architects. They aren't building rings for the planet. They are using the planet's gravitational pull to spin a loom. The ice in the rings, it's not just ice, it's data. Every grain of ice carries a code. When the rings vibrate at a specific frequency, the code is broadcast to the moon. And from the moon, it's beamed down to Earth. They are rewriting us, one generation at a time. The Project Titan II crew didn't come back as heroes. They came back as the new blueprint. We are witnessing the slow-motion replacement of the human race. And the most beautiful, terrifying part, we're paying for it with our tax dollars. Arthur felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He looked at the next photo. It was a long-range shot of Earth taken from Saturn's orbit. A thin, blue line of light was connecting the two planets. It looked like an umbilical cord. "They're feeding," Arthur whispered. He found a folder labeled Voyager Shadow Encounter 4. This was the photo NASA had buried the deepest. It showed Voyager 2 passing near the moon Enceladus. But in the background, one of the massive cylindrical architect ships had uncloaked. It was so large, it blocked out the sun. On the side of the alien ship, there were markings. Arthur's heart stopped. The markings weren't alien. They were ancient Sumerian cuneiform. He translated the symbols using the NASA key provided in the file. It read, "The Harvesters of the Golden Crown." "They've been here since the beginning of our history," Arthur said, his voice trembling. "They aren't from another star system. They own this one. We are just the livestock they've been waiting to mature." He looked at the final image in the Saturn archive. It was a shot of a massive electromagnetic pulse hitting Earth's atmosphere in 1989, the same year as the Great Quebec Blackout. The official story was a solar flare, but the photo showed a beam of light coming directly from Saturn's B ring. The pulse wasn't meant to destroy the power grid, it was meant to activate something inside the people. Every person who was alive in 1989 received a software update to their DNA. Arthur thought about the sudden explosion of technology after the 80s. Smartphones, the constant 24/7 connection to the wires. "The wires," he gasped. "The architects didn't need to land. They just needed us to build the network for them." Suddenly, the truck's radio flickered to life. There was no music, no DJ, just a rhythmic, pulsing hum. Thrum thrum, thrum thrum. "What the?" the young driver muttered, reaching for the dial. "Radio's acting up. Don't touch it," Arthur shouted. But it was too late. The driver's eyes suddenly glazed over. He didn't swerve. He didn't scream. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel with mechanical precision. His pupils began to pulse in sync with the radio's hum. "Son, can you hear me?" Arthur grabbed the boy's shoulder. The driver turned his head slowly. His eyes were no longer brown. A faint, silver shimmer was dancing across his irises. "The rings are in alignment, Arthur," the driver said. The voice wasn't his. It was 1,000 voices speaking at once, a choir of machines. "The architect has finished the repair. Why do you run from the harmony?" Arthur scrambled for the door handle. They were everywhere. The signal wasn't just in the basement anymore. It was in the air. It was in the people. The truck began to accelerate. 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. The driver wasn't looking at the road anymore. He was looking at the moon, which was visible through the windshield. "I won't let you," Arthur growled, his fear turning into a final, desperate rage. He grabbed the steering wheel and jerked it hard to the right. The truck slammed through the guardrail. For a moment, Arthur felt weightless. He looked out the window and saw the moon, a cold silver eye watching him fall. Crash. The world turned into a chaos of metal and glass. Arthur felt a sharp burning pain in his legs. The truck was upside down in a ditch. Smoke was rising from the engine. He looked over at the driver. The young man was dead, his neck broken, but his eyes, even in death, his silver eyes were wide open, staring at the sky. Arthur crawled out of the shattered window, his fingers clawing at the wet grass. He still had the drive. He still had the truth. He looked up at the stars. Saturn was up there, hidden by the clouds, its giant architects spinning the web of our future. "We aren't alone," Arthur whispered, coughing up blood. "We're just being managed." He saw the headlights of another car stopping at the top of the road. He didn't know if they were humans or them, but he didn't care anymore. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his satellite phone. One more upload, one more subfolder. Chapter 4: The Silencing. As the black-suited men began to descend from the highway, Arthur hit the send button with a bloody thumb. "The world is going to see you," he whispered. "Every beautiful, horrific inch of you." A sharp, jagged line of fire running from his ribs to his hip. The truck was a twisted skeleton of metal, steam hissing from the radiator like a dying snake. Arthur lay in the mud, his face pressed against the wet earth. He could taste copper, blood, in his mouth. He looked up toward the highway. The headlights of the black SUVs were cutting through the rain like the cold eyes of a predator. They were coming. They didn't care about the dead boy in the driver's seat. They only cared about the data. "Move, Arthur," he hissed at himself. "Move or die." He dragged his broken body into the thick brush, just as the first pair of heavy boots hit the pavement above. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. Every movement felt like a knife twisting in his side. But the adrenaline, that ancient primal survival instinct, was screaming louder than the pain. He reached a storm drain, a concrete throat that swallowed the runoff from the highway. He rolled inside, the darkness welcoming him. He pulled out the satellite phone. The screen was cracked, but it still flickered. "Upload status, 42%. "Too slow," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The signal is too weak down here." He remembered the morning it all started. Before the crash, before the woods. He had been at his kitchen table, a simple bowl of oatmeal in front of him. Then he had seen it, a black car parked across the street. Then another at the corner. No one got out. They just sat there, watching. He had tried to call his daughter. The line was dead. Not no signal dead, but silent dead. That's when he knew. The architects weren't just in the sky. They were in the phone lines. They were in the satellites. He crawled through the drain, the sound of the rain above, muffled by the thick concrete. His mind raced back to the photos he had seen. Not the ones from space, but the ones from Earth. In the Project Shadow folder, he had found images of meetings. These weren't NASA meetings. They were held in a bunker beneath a private estate in Switzerland. In the photos, the director of NASA was sitting at a table with the heads of the world's largest tech companies, 3 European prime ministers, and a man whose face was blurred in every shot. On the table was a map of the world's fiber optic cables. But it wasn't a map of communication. It was labeled Neural Grid 1.0. It's not just NASA, Arthur realized, his hand clutching his bleeding side. It's a consortium, a global syndicate of people who traded our freedom for a seat at the table of the gods. Suddenly, the air in the storm drain vibrated. Thrum, thrum, thrum. It was coming from the walls. The concrete itself seemed to be humming with that same rhythmic frequency from the truck's radio. "We know you're in the dark, Arthur," a voice echoed through the tunnel. It wasn't one voice. It was a chorus. It sounded like 1,000 people whispering from inside a well. The data is already ours. You're just a broken vessel holding a leak that has already been plugged. Arthur scrambled faster, his knees scraping against the rough concrete. He saw light at the end of the tunnel, a creek bed that led toward the industrial district. He emerged into the open, gasping for air. The industrial district was a wasteland of rusted silos and abandoned warehouses. It was the perfect place to hide, or the perfect place to be killed. He found an old maintenance shed and barricaded the door with a rusted iron bar. He sat on the floor, his back against a cold generator. He needed to finish the upload. He needed to send the photos of the Swiss meeting, the proof that our leaders had sold us out to the architects in exchange for immortality. He looked at the device. 68%, 69%. Come on, he prayed. Just one more minute. He heard a low drone from above. He looked through a crack in the roof. It wasn't a police helicopter. It was a drone, small, silent, and shaped like a perfect hexagon. It didn't have propellers. It floated on a cushion of blue light. It was architect tech, disguised as a human drone. The drone scanned the shed. A red laser lattice swept across the walls, passing over Arthur's body. Found you, the voice whispered in his head. Arthur didn't panic. He couldn't. He was too tired for panic. Instead, he felt a cold, sharp clarity. He realized that the syndicate wasn't just hiding the truth because of fear. They were hiding it because they were being rewritten too. The silver eyes he saw in the driver, they were in the eyes of the politicians in the photos. They were in the eyes of the CEOs. The conspiracy wasn't a human one. It was a biological takeover. We weren't being conquered by ships. We were being conquered by a signal that turned our leaders into nodes in a machine. Bang! The shed door groaned. Someone was hitting it with a sledgehammer. Bang! Arthur Elliot, a man's voice shouted. This one sounded human, angry, desperate. Open the door. You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to trigger a global reset. If that data hits the public servers, they will accelerate the harvest. Arthur looked at the screen. 85%. A global reset? Arthur shouted back, his voice cracking. You mean you'll stop pretending to be human? You've already sold us. You've already turned the moon into a weapon. We saved what we could, the voice shouted back. We negotiated. If we hadn't cooperated, they would have wiped the planet clean in 74. We bought you 40 years of life. Life? Arthur laughed, a bitter, bloody sound. You call this life? Being livestock for a planet-sized machine? I'd rather be ash. 92%. 94%. The door began to buckle. Arthur could see the tip of a crowbar prying the wood apart. He looked at the last subfolder in the drive. It was labeled the kill switch. He hadn't opened it yet. He had been too focused on the photos of the ships and the architects. But now, with the door breaking down and his life ebbing away, he clicked it. His eyes widened. It wasn't a photo. It was a schematic. It showed the cathedral on the moon. A specific frequency, a human frequency that could disrupt the blue energy. They're not gods, Arthur whispered. They're just software. And software can be deleted. 99%. The door burst open. 3 men in black tactical gear rushed in, their rifles raised. But they weren't aiming for his heart. They were aiming for the device. Upload complete. Arthur smiled, blood coating his teeth. Too late. The men froze. The drone above the shed suddenly spun out of control and crashed into the roof. Outside, the rhythmic humming of the city stopped. For the first time in 40 years, the air was silent. The lead agent, a man with a scarred face and cold, silver-flecked eyes, lowered his rifle. He looked at his hand. It was shaking. What did you just send? Arthur said, leaning back against the generator as the world began to fade to black. I sent the virus, the one Ben Lawson found in the cathedral, the one that makes them glitch. The agent's silver eyes flared bright blue, then flickered out like a dying light bulb. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. Arthur closed his eyes. He was so tired. He thought of the moon, cold and distant. He hoped that somewhere out there, the architects were feeling the first shiver of fear. The silence in the shed was more terrifying than the noise had been. The lead agent lay on the floor, gasping. His two companions were leaned against the wall, their rifles forgotten, their hands clawing at their temples. The blue light that usually pulsed through the architect technology was flickering like a dying fluorescent bulb. Arthur watched them with a detached sort of pity. He realized that these men weren't just villains. They were victims of a sophisticated infection. They had traded their souls for a place in the new world, and now that the signal was glitching, they were realizing the cost of that bargain. He looked at his satellite phone. The message read, "Global broadcast successful. Data distributed to 14,000 independent servers." "It's out," Arthur whispered. "You can't pull it back now." He struggled to his feet, using the generator for support. His ribs screamed in protest, and his vision was swimming in a sea of gray. He needed to get out of here before the consortium sent something worse than men with guns. He stumbled past the agents out into the rainy night, but the world outside had changed. The city lights, the distant glow of the industrial district, were blinking in a strange, erratic pattern. It wasn't a power failure. It was the virus he had uploaded. The code Ben Lawson had found wasn't just a weapon. It was a mirror. It forced the architect's software to see its own flaws. As Arthur walked toward the creek bed, his satellite phone buzzed again. This wasn't an automated message. It was a video call. He answered it. The face on the screen was one he recognized from the secret photos. It was the director of NASA. But he wasn't in his office. He was in a bunker, and his face was pale, his silver eyes dull and frightened. "Arthur," the director said, his voice cracking, "do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just leak photos. You leaked the access codes. They are losing their grip on the grid." "Good," Arthur spat, leaning against a rusted fence. "Let them fall. Let us all fall, if it means we can be human again." "You don't understand," the director shouted, his image flickering with static. "They aren't just software. They are the life support system for this planet. We made the deal because we had to. Without the architects, the Earth's magnetic field will destabilize. We were fixing what we broke in the 20th century." Arthur paused. Was this the ultimate lie, or the ultimate truth? Was the conspiracy actually a desperate attempt to save a dying world? "Then we'll fix it ourselves," Arthur said, his voice cold, "without the silver eyes, without the pods, without the harvest." "It's too late for that," the director whispered. "Look at the sky, Arthur." Arthur looked up. The clouds were parting. The rain had stopped, and there, hanging in the sky near the moon, was a fleet. Not ships, but massive glowing shapes that looked like shards of broken glass. Hundreds of them. They had been cloaked for 40 years, and now, because of Arthur's leak, they were revealing themselves. The architects were no longer hiding in the rings of Saturn. They were here. "The harvest has been moved up," the director said, a single silver tear rolling down his cheek. "They are coming to reset the experiment." Arthur felt a cold dread wash over him. Had he won, or had he just accelerated the end of the world? He looked at the thumb drive in his hand. There was one folder he hadn't touched. It was marked, "For the Final Analyst." He opened it. Inside was a single photo. It wasn't of space or machines. It was a photo of a young Arthur Elliot, taken 40 years ago on his first day at NASA. He was smiling, his eyes full of wonder. Under the photo was a note, written in his own handwriting, but from a future he hadn't lived yet. "Arthur, if you are reading this, the cycle has repeated. The leak is the trigger. The architects need us to rebel so they can justify the reset. But there's one thing they don't know. One thing we kept hidden even from the signal." Arthur's heart hammered. He scrolled down. "The virus isn't meant to kill them. It's meant to wake us up. Look at your hand." Arthur looked at his hand, the one that had been holding the drive. The blood from his wounds wasn't just red. It was shimmering. Small golden sparks were dancing in his veins. He realized then the true twist. The infection wasn't a takeover. It was an evolution. The human race had been absorbing the architect data for 40 years, and Arthur's virus was the catalyst that turned the slaves into equals. He felt a sudden surge of energy. The pain in his ribs vanished. The gray in his vision cleared, replaced by a crystalline sharpness that allowed him to see the very atoms in the air. He wasn't an old man anymore. He was something new. He looked at the agents who were still on the floor of the shed. They were standing up now, but they weren't reaching for their guns. They were looking at their own hands, their eyes no longer silver, but a brilliant, burning gold. The conspiracy wasn't to hide the aliens, Arthur whispered, a smile spreading across his face. The conspiracy was to hide our own potential. He looked back at the sky, at the fleet of architect ships. They didn't look like monsters anymore. They looked like... "Let them come," Arthur said, his voice echoing with a power he had never known. "We're ready to graduate." He turned away from the industrial district and began to walk toward the light. He had leaked the truth, and in doing so, he had ended the world as he knew it, and started a new one. The world didn't end with a bang or a whimper. It ended with a hum. Arthur Elliot stood on the edge of the creek, his body glowing with a soft, golden luminescence that defied the laws of physics. The rain that touched his skin didn't make him wet. It seemed to vaporize into tiny sparks of energy. He wasn't just Dr. Arthur Elliot anymore. He was the first page of a new book. He looked at his satellite phone one last time. The device was glowing white-hot, the plastic melting, yet it didn't burn his hand. The virus he had sent out wasn't just on the servers now. It was in the air, in the water, and in the very DNA of every living thing. "The final analyst," he whispered, remembering the note. "I am the one who closes the circuit." He swiped his finger across the liquid screen. The last hidden folder on the drive, the one that had been locked since the beginning, finally yielded. It was titled, "The Last Message, SOS Earth." This wasn't a NASA file. It wasn't from the consortium. It was a recording from the future. As the file played, Arthur didn't just hear the sound. He saw the data projected into the air around him like a holographic dream. He saw the Earth, thousands of years from now. It was a barren rock, its atmosphere stripped away, its oceans turned to salt. And in the center of the ruins was a single massive antenna, broadcasting a signal back through time. The architects weren't invaders from Saturn. They were the janitors of the future, sent back by a dying humanity to try and fix the timeline. Voice recording start. The voice is Arthur's, but older, tireder. "If you are hearing this, Arthur, then the loop is almost complete. We failed in our time. We let the technology consume us before we were ready. We built the architects to save us, but they became our prison. They went back to manage us, but they forgot what it meant to be human. The leak you just broadcast, it's not a virus to kill them. It's the humanity patch. It's the missing code that tells the architects that we don't need to be harvested. We need to be set free. Look at the moon, Arthur. Look at the cathedral. It's not a weapon. It's a door." Arthur's breath caught in his throat. Everything he had thought was a conspiracy, the Apollo 19 nightmare, the Saturn machines, the silver-eyed agents, it was all a desperate, misguided attempt by a future humanity to save themselves by controlling their past. They had sent the architects back to ensure that humans grew up controlled and stable, but in doing so, they had stifled the very soul of the race. Arthur looked up at the sky. The fleet of shards, the architect's ships, were no longer aggressive. They were hovering, silent, as if they were waiting for a command. Suddenly, a brilliant beam of light shot down from the moon. It didn't hit a city. It hit Arthur. He didn't scream. He felt his consciousness expand. He saw every person on Earth at that moment. He saw a mother in Dhaka holding her child, both of them staring at the glowing sky. He saw a farmer in Brazil, his eyes turning from brown to gold. He saw the consortium leaders in their bunkers, realizing that their power was gone. Not because they were defeated, but because everyone was now as powerful as they were. "The harvest is over," Arthur said, his voice echoing across the global network. "The evolution has begun." He opened the final subfolder. It contained the forbidden photos that NASA had truly never released, because they hadn't been taken yet. They were photos of Earth, 500 years in the future. The cities were built of light and glass, harmonious with the forests and oceans. Humans were traveling to the stars, not in metal cans, but as beings of energy. And in the center of it all, the architects were no longer masters, but partners. But there was one last photo. It was a picture of Arthur Elliot's own grave. The date on the headstone was today. He smiled. He understood now. To complete the leak, to truly bridge the gap between the past and the future, he had to give up his physical form. He had to become the signal itself. "Arthur," he turned around. The agents from the shed were running toward him, but they weren't the cold, silver-eyed men anymore. They were crying. They were feeling. "Don't do it, Arthur," the lead agent shouted. "You can live. We can build this world together." "I am building it," Arthur said softly. "I'm just moving to a different room." He reached into his chest and pulled out the glowing core of the thumb drive. It was no longer plastic. It was a pulsing heart of pure data. He looked at the moon. He looked at the architects. "This is Dr. Arthur Elliot," he broadcasted to every speaker, every screen, and every mind on Earth. "NASA told you the stars were empty. They told you we were alone. They were lying. We are the stars, and it's time we finally came home." He squeezed the core. A blinding white light erupted from his body, turning the night into a brilliant golden day. The shockwave traveled across the globe, not destroying, but waking up everything it touched. The consortium servers melted. The architect's ships dissolved into a cloud of glowing dust that settled over the Earth like a protective blanket. And then, Arthur Elliot was gone. It transformed. Across the globe, people stood in frozen awe. In the bustling streets of Tokyo, the silent villages of the Andes, and the crowded markets of Cairo, the hum that had dominated the atmosphere for 40 years finally stopped. It was replaced by something long forgotten. The sound of a world breathing for itself. Arthur wasn't dead. He felt dispersed. He was in the rustle of the leaves, the surge of the tides, and the heartbeat of the very people he had sacrificed himself to save. His consciousness was the final leak, the one NASA could never plug and the consortium could never own. High above, the moon, the cold, silent observer, began to change. The cathedral on its dark side, that jagged spire of obsidian, started to crumble. Not from an explosion, but as if its purpose had finally been fulfilled. The blue light that had pulsed from it for eons turned into a warm, golden glow, radiating outward like a new sun. The architect ships, those terrifying shards of future tech, began to drift away from Earth's orbit. They weren't retreating. They were dissolving. Their metallic hulls turned into billions of microscopic particles, the humanity patch that rained down upon the atmosphere. Every person who inhaled that dust felt the silver veil lift from their minds. Final log. Anonymous journalist. 48 hours after the event. They're calling it the Golden Dawn. 2 days ago, the internet died. Every server, every database, every secret file owned by every government on this planet was wiped clean. In its place, a single file appeared on every screen simultaneously. A collection of photos. Photos of the moon, photos of Saturn, photos of us. But it wasn't just data. We all remembered things we hadn't lived. We remembered the choice we made in the future to send the architects back. And we remembered the choice Arthur Elliot made to stop them. The men in suits? They're gone. Not arrested, not killed. They just don't have anyone to command anymore. The silver eyes are gone. We look at each other now and we see, well, we see ourselves. For the first time in history, we aren't being managed. We are free to fail. We are free to be human. Arthur's satellite phone, now a charred piece of slag in the mud of a Maryland creek bed, gave one last flicker. On its cracked screen, a final image appeared. It wasn't a photo from the archive. It was a live feed from the surface of the moon. There, in the middle of the now silent Aiken Basin, stood two figures in old, weathered NASA suits, Miller and Lawson. They weren't ghosts, and they weren't machines. They were standing by their original lunar module, looking up at the Earth. They were finally going home. Arthur's voice, now a gentle whisper in the wind that swept across the industrial district, echoed one last time. "Don't be afraid of the dark anymore," the wind seemed to say. The dark was just a curtain we weren't ready to pull back. Now the show is ours. In the distance, the sun began to rise. It wasn't the artificial, filtered light of the architect era. It was raw, it was bright, it was terrifyingly beautiful. The forbidden photos were no longer forbidden. They were the family album of a species that had finally graduated from its cradle. NASA's secrets had been the walls of our nursery. Arthur Elliot had simply opened the door and invited us to walk outside. The legend of the man who leaked the moon would be told for generations. Not as a story of conspiracy, but as a story of a man who looked at the stars and refused to believe they were a prison. And somewhere, in a place where time and space are just words, Arthur Elliot finally sat down on a porch with Martha, 2 cups of coffee between them, and watched the Earth turn, no longer as an analyst, but as a witness to the greatest story ever told. File closed, system shut down, humanity online.